All right, hello everyone. I am Mithranor, and I'm here today to talk about the first deck I really tested on the latest patch. It's the patch at the end of October, 1st of November timeframe, and it's a Cursed Skellige deck. Now, you're going to be seeing probably a lot of these pop up in the early days of this patch. A lot of streamers are going to be playing similar looking decks. So I wanted to jump on top of this and cover what I built on the first day before anyone else does. But I think this deck is very solid. I think that we will be seeing a lot of this in the early days. I don't know how long this is going to remain viable as the meta refines itself. But for now, this deck is very powerful. I got top 100 on the first night of the patch. Not really like tryharding super hard, but just, playing the deck, testing it out. And the record for the deck was very good. I think it was 25 and 3 at the end of the night with this deck. So very, very solid win rate. Winning against everything. I've seen other curse decks. I've seen Mill. I've seen Spies. I've seen Reveal. I've seen Monster Consume. I've seen the new, the Slizzard and Necker spam monster. I've seen Weather Monster still. Old Restore Skellige. There was a bunch of stuff in those games, in those 28 games. And it did very well against all of them. The one matchup that I had the most trouble with is Radovid. And that may be because two of the games I played against him were, one was a tie and one was a loss, were in the very early stages of testing this deck. And so I think the cards were a tiny bit different, and I since moved forward with it to come up with this version. So what we have is the current version of the deck, and I may make changes in the future. I'm still refining it, but I wanted to get this out there. And I think it's a very solid deck right now. Now the golds, I'm gonna start with the golds. The golds are a bit interesting because we have here a lot, and I mean a lot, of just straight up removal cards. Like we have Lugos, Coral, and Igni, and then you can even think of Muzzle as a sort of removal because you're stealing something from your opponent by doing so. Now, these are pretty much some of the only control methods that this deck has at its disposal. So that's why pretty much all four of the golds are some sort of control or removal. I'm gonna start with Muzzle. Muzzle, I put in the deck initially because I wanted to test out the card. It's a new card. I liked the idea of it. I saw its potential with being able to steal things with active effects, especially. K20 Siege supports. Impera Brigades, kind of not a great steal, but still not terrible. Other things like the Nilfgaard, I forget the name. The one that buffs cards when you play a soldier. It's a 7-point unit. You can steal it. And then this deck also runs a lot of soldiers. So soldier, not a soldier, but this is soldier as well. So we have 9 soldier cards in this deck. Meaning that, every time we play one of these 9, actually we have more than 9 because Jean Geoffrey is a soldier and yeah, that's it. So we have 10 soldier cards in this deck. So that card actually gets decent value in this deck. And it denies a key component to your opponent. And that's one of the more important parts of Muzzle. Is you gain a little bit of benefit from what your opponent was going to use, but your opponent loses that benefit. And since they're including that in their deck as an active effect card, they're going to be relying on something that card does. K20 Siege supports Northern Realms is going to be wanting to maybe Henzult that. You steal it before they can Henzult it. They don't have a Henzult target. They might be using that for their PFIs. Which suddenly become a lot worse because you stole their buffs. Or they might be using it with that new silver that spawns the cows. I can't remember his name at the moment. Too many new cards. In Nilfgaard, you steal their soldier buffer. That's one of their big plays in a mill deck because they're going to be playing Magna Division and a lot of soldiers, using that to make their plays, their Magna Division a lot more powerful. So it's a very solid card in that regard. Stealing your opponent, it's just a very solid card. Stealing your opponent's units is always a good thing if you use it on the right units. You can also use it in some situations on carryover cards. So maybe you can steal an Ekimara at 8 points, or you can steal a Morkvarg that's been damaged or died already, or you can steal things like that new silver in Northern Realms that is 10 points and he dies and he comes back at 1 point and he just keeps coming back. You can steal that guy, you know? So they don't have that little bit of carryover for them in the future rounds. So overall, I think Muzzle's a very solid neutral card. I would recommend it as a craft, an early craft for pretty much anyone. I think this could fit in a lot of decks as a filler or just a solid card. Now, moving on to, let's go with Lugos. Lugos, I think is maybe one of the most flexible golds in this deck in a couple ways, meaning that I think he's one of the golds that if you're going to swap, you swap out Lugos. So I've seen a lot of people suggest I try this guy, Vabjorn, instead of one of my golds. And if I were to do that, I would take out Lugos, because Lugos discarding a unit isn't as advantageous as it is in a restore deck. You're not looking to discard things to thin through your deck. Sure, discarding can be helpful, and it's a very powerful play. Usually it's a 6 plus an 8, so a 14-point play. Not bad removing something on your opponent's side of the board. But removing something from your deck also means that your Battle Maidens may have less targets. But what it can also do is set up your Battle Maidens. If you don't have any archers in your hand, but you have a Priestess and a Battle Maiden, you can Lugos the Archer, resurrect it, and then Battle Maiden it, and use this like that. Same thing with the Raging Berserker or the Berserker Marauder. You can do that with any of these 3 bronzes here. So that's one little bit of his versatility right there. Now, I still think he is the most swappable card, because usually you're not going to have dead Battle Maidens in your hand in the early game, so it's not as big of a problem. But it is helpful if you want to find a card that you didn't find. Mainly Raging Berserker is what I find that I'm missing, because this plus Battle Maiden is a really solid play. Thinning your deck, big points, and just pulling another unit. So we'll move on to Coral. Coral, I don't think Coral could ever be taken out of any Skellige decks. Maybe in a few cases, but in most competitive Skellige decks, Coral will be a card. She's just too good to not use, because she plays Jade Figurine, or Artifact Compression, to make a Jade Figurine. So this card is instantly really valuable. You have targets in pretty much every faction. You can hit, say, a marksman in Scoia'tael. You can hit the Vrihead Dragoons in Scoia'tael, the ones that buff every turn. You could hit a big Imperial Brigade in Nilfgaard. You could hit a whatever they pull from Joachim in Nilfgaard. You can hit pretty much any big unit in an opponent's deck, which is also really good in a mirror, because if you run into Zhang Fret and they play him early, which they will probably do, Coral that Zhang Fret, and they are probably a little bit annoyed with you. So I think Coral is really good and has some really obvious uses just by removing key cards of your opponents. Also, things like Farseers and Doublethon of Protectors as well in Scoia'tael, and then things across other factions. And then Igni. Igni's use is kind of self-explanatory. Big removal in some cases, kind of falls off in value in others, but you have your archers to potentially try to set up a better Igni, but oftentimes your opponent is going to be playing a lot of similarly valued cards. You'll see a lot of opponents with, maybe accidentally putting 3 8s on the same row. Okay, that row's at 24. If they have anything else on that row, you have an Igni. Or just being able to Igni something really big, like Igni Unseen Elder, or Igni a really big Vran Warrior in a Consume deck, things like that. Obviously, Coral is also an option for those, but they have some slightly different uses. Coral, you may want to hit a Necker, whereas Igni, you would want to hit their big Vran Warrior instead. So what you could do, let the Vran Warrior keep eating the Neckers, and it gets bigger and bigger. They're depleting the Neckers from their deck. You Igni it, and then if they're still playing, you Coral the Necker, or do it in the reverse order. And you probably won't have both of those cards in this situation, but it's something you can do if you do have both of them. So that's some ways that they're a little bit different uses. You obviously wouldn't, you usually don't want to Igni a big Necker because it's just going to get replaced. But Igniing the big Vran Warrior Unseen Elder, very good play. So that pretty much covers the golds. Again, I think Vabjorn might actually be runnable in this deck, simply because the archers are pretty good. However, I have not played Vabjorn yet, simply because I see too many situations where he would be useless. Against Foltest, he's instantly pretty bad. You have to hit their units twice with an archer in order to use Vabjorn. And against something like Spelatal, he's really bad because you're never going to be able to hit their Farseers or Dolbothana Protectors with Vabjorn, whereas Lugos would still have some value against them. So I think Vabjorn is overall, it would be good in, say, a mirror, but probably not so good in a lot of other matchups. But he is something to test out. I just haven't done so yet. For the silvers now, I really like this set of silvers, and I know people have suggested I run Skjall in the deck as well, but I don't personally like Skjall in this deck. I know he has that cursed synergy, but for one thing, I don't see a unit I would take out. Or a silver I would take out of this deck. Restore and Sigdrifa are way too good to take out. Zhangfret, way too good to take out. Herald Houndsnout, way too good to take out. Morkvarg, carryover right now is a little bit of an interesting topic, and I think it's too good to not have any sort of attempt at carryover in your deck. So I think Morkvarg stays as well. Grimmist would be the most swappable card, but then you run into the issue of you have no weather clears if you take out Grimmist. So I think Grimmist has to stay. He's also very good because he plays a bear. And while this doesn't show it right here, Blood-Curdling Roar creates a bear, and bears are cursed. So you have another cursed unit off of Grimmist. Grimmist is also a fantastic restore target. Your main restore targets are usually going to be a Battle Maiden, Herald, or Grimmist is what I usually do. Battle Maiden is fantastic because it goes from a 2 to a 10. Huge, huge card at that point. And it pulls another unit. So you play Restore Battle Maiden, hitting one of your Raging Berserkers. That's a 10 plus 6 plus 6. So that's a massive 22-point play right there off of that Restore. Also thinning a card out of your deck. Usually that's a round 3 play though, so thinning wouldn't matter as much, but it's a really solid play nonetheless. Also, Restore Grimmist for a 10-point Grimmist, and then you play the bear eating like a Priestess, for example. Also a really high power play. Restore Herald, I use every now and then, only really when I don't have a Battle Maiden as an option, because Herald can do a similar thing as the Battle Maiden, but also slightly better if your opponent doesn't stop you. So, since Herald's a new card, I'll go over what he does a little bit. Herald is a 6-point silver. He spawns, he's also cursed. He spawns these three skulls, Wilmar, Wilfred, and Wilhelm. Now, we'll go in order here. Wilmar spawns on the opposite row of where you play Herald. So he spawns on your opponent's side. So 1-point skull. And he has this new tag, this revenge ability here. And what it does is when the revenge is procced, which I'll explain in a second, the opposing player, meaning you, plays a random bronze cursed unit from their deck. So, very good play to be able to get out a bronze cursed unit. Now, Revenge. So here it is. Trigger this ability when the card is removed from the board to the graveyard on your opponent's turn. So since this is on your opponent's side of the board, it can only activate on their opponent's turn, meaning your turn. So this means the only way this skull can be activated is if you activate it yourself. So what you don't want to do is play this and have the skull spawn in a like frost or rain, because if it gets popped on by that weather on your opponent's turn, the skull was worthless to you. It was pretty bad at that point. So what you want to do is you want to put it on a clear row, hope that your opponent doesn't kill it themselves, and hope that they don't lock it. I have not run into a lot of people that play around this skull. Some people do, but it's still manageable if they do. And so we'll get onto the other skulls, which, strangely enough, synergize really well with each other. Wilfred, who spawns on the left side of Harold, he has a death wish, where he strengthens a random ally by 3. So he spawns on your side of the board, you break the skull, and one of your allies gets strengthened by 3. So basically popping the skull is an extra 2-point play, but it strengthens a unit, meaning that if you resurrect it at some point, it's going to have that 3 extra strength later on. So it's a very, very good thing to hit. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this does activate when the round ends. So if you don't break this in round 1 and it goes off, it's going to strengthen something going into round 2. Now, it could be anything on your board at the time of the round ends, so you want to keep that in mind. Usually breaking this early is usually good because you'll maybe hit Jean-Fret or Morkvarg, which are probably your 2 best targets to hit with this. And then Wilhelm spawns on the right side of Harold Houndsnout. Now what this does is when you break it, its Death Wish, is it damages all units on the opposite row by 1. So what you can do is you can break Wilhelm and Wilfred, and Wilhelm will break Wilmar because he spawns on the opposite side, on the opposite row from you. So Wilhelm will break this skull for you. So you damage any units your opponent has on that row, you break this skull, you get a cursed unit, and you strengthen something on your side of the board by 3. Very solid play, especially when you couple this with, honestly, one of the highest point plays, one of the highest point early plays in the game. What you do is, keep in mind, I'm playing Croc on Crate instead of, say, King Bran in this deck. Now, what that means, Croc on Crate pulls the highest unit in your deck, highest bronze or silver in your deck, strengthens it by 3, and then damages it by 1. So, what you do, you play Croc 5 points on your board. So you play Herald first. Then you play Croc. Croc will always pull Jean-Fret, assuming he's not in your hand. Jean-Fret comes out, strengthened by 3, so he goes to 13 points. He then gets damaged by 1, so he's 12 points. But Jean-Fret's ability, damage 2 allies by 1, and strengthen self by 2 for each. So what you do is you pull out Jean-Fret, you hit the 2 skulls that Harold has, meaning you break the opposite skull, and you get the strengthened by 3. So if you're really lucky, the strengthened by 3 will land on Jean-Fret, and he will instantly be a 20-point card. He'll be 19 points on the board because he's damaged by 1, but he'll be a 20-point card. And after that, you pull out a cursed unit from your deck. So one of these 2 guys will be a cursed bronze unit specifically. One of these 2 will be coming out of your deck. Very good. So basically you have 19, 24, however much damage you did. So a minimum of, 1 damage. So 25 points plus the 2. Well, okay. I already counted the 2 strengthen. I guess 24. Sorry. Plus either 6 from this guy or 8 plus a minimum of 3 because you have, or 2, sorry, because you have Jean-Fret damage and you have Harold Houndsnout, who is cursed. So this guy coming out as well. Really, really big tempo play that you can do extremely early in round 1. I've gotten 2-card advantage off of this play so many times, it's absurd. So you can just play this. Your opponent, if you went second, your opponent will most likely pass on you. If they play into it, they probably will not pass you, and you just pass and take that 2-card advantage. Even if you don't have Morkvarg on the board, it's worth the 2-card advantage, because then what happens is you go into round 2, your opponent is 2 cards down, so they do one of 2 things. They dry pass you, you play Morkvarg, or they play into you and you have a 2-card advantage. They might play a spy, but still you're going to be going into round 3 with 1-card advantage almost every time, unless something catastrophic happens in round 2. You could also, if you think you can force a win in round 1, you could continue playing in round 1 and try to win that 1 card up instead, and then dry pass in round 2 yourself if you want to. But you run the risk of your opponent being able to catch up to you in points in round 1 and playing carryover, making them be able to not be dry passed, because their carryover would beat your Morkvarg carryover. But anyway, that kind of covers Morkvarg's usage as well. He's just a carryover card in this deck. And I covered Grimmist a little bit. He's also just, he's there because he's versatile. He has that Clear Skies against Cold Weather, so that's pretty good as well, especially with Clear Skies getting buffed. And then I covered Restore. You're going to be restoring a Battle Maiden, Grimmist, or Herald in most cases. Herald, so you want to, if you restore Herald, you obviously want to restore Herald before you play Sigdrifa. And you want to try to play Sigdrifa into Zhang Fret the very last, because if your opponent has any removal, they're going to be saving it for him. What you have to keep in mind, though, is against monsters, they have Catachan and Caretaker that you need to be careful of. So sometimes you might want to play this a little early so that you avoid their Caretaker or Catachan. It's a little bit tricky because it's hard to make that timing correct, because you have to think, well, what if they have Igni? You know, that type of thing as well. However, I have still won games where this guy got Catachaned or Caretakered. It's still very winnable because the deck itself is just very strong plays overall. So then we get to the bronzes. The bronzes are kind of a little bit self-explanatory. You have these cursed units. This guy is a soldier. So actually, and these are soldiers too. So your Battle Maidens can pull any of these 3 bronzes, okay? And your priestesses are good, you know, because you can res shit. So in round 1, what you're generally looking for out of a mulligan is usually as many gold as you can get. Muzzle's a great round 1 card. Lugos is a great round 1 card. Igni and Coral are sometimes good, but usually Coral I would try to save. Igni is, I think, better. You do not want Zhang Fret in your hand. You do want Morkvarg, and you do want Herald. I usually try to only have 1 of each of these cards, because I can use the Battle Maidens to pull the other ones, okay? And if they die, then maybe try to have a Priestess in your hand as well, because if they die, then you can resurrect them and then use the Battle Maiden on them. Still very good. So, common way to play round 1 is you want to play a Raging Berserker early, and then in your second turn, if you don't have Herald especially, in your second turn, you could play Battle Maiden, pulling another Raging Berserker. So this is 2 points hitting this guy for 1, but since he gets damaged, he actually just turns into the 12-point bear. So really, it's 2 plus 6, pulling another 6. So it's a 14-point play. Very strong right there. Then late in the round, when you have several cursed and or damaged units on the board, you're going to want to play your Berserker Marauders, and these things will usually be 12 to 14 points, sometimes even higher if you're lucky, but you have to remember they're regressing, so you're not getting a big res out of these later on. But they're still very good to play in a long round, especially late, because they're just very strong bronzes to play. And then the archers I have in here as well, because they're good for lining up Igni, they're good for breaking Herald's skulls, they're also good for transforming the Raging Berserkers, and they're good for putting a single point of damage on other units of yours. So if your opponent, if for some reason you have your opponent where you don't really want to damage them, but you don't want to damage yourself either, it's actually okay to damage yourself, assuming you're damaging an undamaged unit, because that just adds another point to the Berserker Marauder. So basically, any damage you do to yourself is just going to be adding to the Berserker Marauder later on. So the archers are just very good for several reasons there, and they also can be pulled by the Battle Maiden. So these are solid 11-point play, if you want them to be, and they can be pulled by the Battle Maiden. So you play this plus this, and since it does 1 point of damage, it's a 12-point play. Very, very good, considering it also thins your deck for you as well. So going into the later rounds, you should probably have a little bit of a thin deck, making your draws on golds and silvers a little bit easier. And you might have a Battle Maiden in your graveyard, which you can then later restore. So that kind of covers the deck. If you want to see how it works, you can watch the VOD of me playing it yesterday, or October 31st, since yesterday is a very relative term. But I will probably be playing this again in the near future, and I'm sure other streamers will be playing similar decks to this as well in the near future as well. Also, so thanks for watching. I will be trying to put out some more videos as I go through some more decks in this current patch. And that will about do it. Thanks everyone. I'll try to put out another video soon. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.